This edition is dedicated to the game CSGO. There are around 30 guns currently present in Counter-Strike Global Offensive. However, knives are almost always the most valuable items in the inventory. To kill someone in CS is not that easy, but if you still manage to do it, it brings wild joy to everyone, and players immediately respect you, while your victim awaits shame and disgrace. Each player has knives in any round, and they constantly flash in front of us. Because by taking them in his hands, our character moves faster. In Counter-Strike, there is a whole bunch of different skins, but as we understand it, it's nothing more than a modified texture. While for knives, Valve didn't hesitate to make unique models. And no matter what model you have in your hands, all knives work exactly the same. But is it true in real life? In fact, of course not, and each of them has a different shape not for beauty, but because each knife is a special tool created for specific purposes, and for this release I decided to choose the most interesting and unusual knives from CSGO. And the first knife we'll talk about today, let's refer to it as a Kerambit. It has a non-standard curved shape, a cool rotating animation, and the main price in Steam ranges from 10 to 100,000 for particularly rare colorings. But all this pertains to CS directly, but what is such an unusual knife required for in real life? In reality, the Kerambit has a rich history. This dangerous-looking knife comes from Southeast Asia, where people from Indonesia, Malaysia, and the Philippines used it, no, not for murder at all. Farmers actually harvested rice with his help. Yes, that very Kerambit was just a tool in the household, something like a scythe. Well, of course there were also versions of it that were used as weapons. What is interesting, a whole martial art called Silet was even built around this knife. And looking at how skillfully the guys from Asia handle the Kerambit, you understand that this knife is far from being as simple as it might seem. And indeed, skillful warriors with Kerambit in their hands look very impressive, and it is clear that in battle such a steel claw could inflict very serious wounds, but unlike that, as we can see in the case, in reality the Kerambit was often not that big. The idea was that the blade would only protrude from the hand by a few centimeters, making it more difficult to keep track of in battle. However, while your grandmother can handle a regular knife well, in order to possess the tactics of fighting with a Kerambit, one needs to be a true master and train for years. Asking if such a knife could really appear in the hands of counter-terrorists or terrorists, it's obvious that most likely the answer will be no. Simply because it is much easier to learn how to handle a knife of standard shape. But there is another problem with the Kerambit. No matter how beautiful it may look on video, in a real fight against a person with an ordinary knife, it will be difficult for him to fight. Generally, with equal skill, a regular knife is more likely to win because all movements with it are simple and intuitive. And he's also just 10 centimeters longer. Nevertheless, due to its interesting shape and beautiful martial art, Kerambit has gathered many fans around the world. And many buy this knife not to learn how to fight or cut sausage, just to spin it in your hands. Well, what? Looks cool. That's how a weapon with a centuries-old history has turned into something like a spinner in modern realities. The second of the knives in CS, which also looks very unusual, is of course the butterfly knife. Looks cool in the hands, is impressively pulled out, and most importantly, it costs from 12 to over 100,000 rubles on Steam. In summary, with this knife, the individuals will undoubtedly have respect for you. It might appear to be modern, but it was actually invented a relatively long time ago, in the 18th century. But if ceramide was really used as a weapon in combat, then a butterfly knife certainly was never in the arsenal of the army or special services. They probably used it to open boxes, or ordinary people carried it with them as a self-defense weapon. And yet, back in the 80s of the 20th century, gangsters really loved to use a butterfly knife in street fights, or just to rob someone. After all, agree, an ordinary knife was pulled out of the pocket. Well, it's not that scary. But if you sharply and confidently take out a butterfly knife and even spin it a couple of times, then the impression will be completely different. That's probably why they decided to ban such a knife in some states of America. But not only because it looked dangerous and was often used by bandits, but also because everyone liked to spin it so much that the hospital constantly received unsuccessful stuntmen who played with a butterfly knife and earned themselves serious injuries and a dozen stitches. But there are still a large number of people who continue to study beautiful tricks with him and compete with butterfly knives against each other. However, it is not worth thinking that the knife has always been an exclusive toy. The thing is that automatic switchblades appeared quite late, and you simply can't quickly take out and open a folding knife with one hand, but you can literally take out a butterfly knife with one motion, so at least it was a convenient alternative. As for combat qualities, it is highly doubtful that counters or terrorists, being in their right mind, would want to take a butterfly knife instead of a normal combat knife, which is specially adapted to withstand loads, chop, and even fight with it in hand significantly more convenient. And when compared to real military cold weapons, a butterfly knife is nothing more than a toy for children. Put a like if you found the story of these knives interesting. And write which knives from KSK are your favorites.